In this video on data validation basics, apart from a brief introduction, we shall be looking at the benefits of data validation, the process of specifying different data validation criteria, checking the different types of data validation that you can apply, looking at some practical examples in Excel, explaining all these different types of options, and finally followed by the conclusion. But before that, hi, I am Pratap Narula, investment consultant and educator, and if you like my video, please put in your likes and subscribe to my channel. Also, ring that bell to get all future notifications from this channel and put in your feedbacks and comments. Further, put in your questions in the comment box and I shall get back to you on the same. Excel data validation is a feature that restricts or validates user input to a worksheet. Technically, you create a validation rule that controls what kind of data can be entered into a certain cell. For example, you may want to limit data entry in a particular cell to whole numbers between 1 and 12. But if the user makes an invalid entry, you can display a custom message as the one displayed, post which the user will have to retry another entry. Coming to the benefits of data validation, it ensures cost effectiveness because it saves time and money by making sure that the data sets collected and used in processing are clean and accurate. It is easy to integrate and is compatible with most processes. It ensures that the data collected from different sources, structured or unstructured, meet the business requirement by creating a standard database and cleaning dataset information. With increased data accuracy, it ensures increased profitability and reduced loss in the long run. It also provides better decision making, strategy, and enhanced market goals. Next, let's look at the process of specifying different types of data validation criteria. First, we select a cell or range of cells. Then we choose data and then data tools and finally data validation as shown on your screens. The keyboard shortcut to open the data validation window is Alt A, V and V, which are to be pressed one after the other. Next, we select the Settings tab. In the Settings tab, we choose an option from the Allow drop-down list, after which we choose an option from the Data drop-down list. Then we specify the validation conditions by using the displayed controls. Next, we select the Input Message tab and specify which message to display when a user selects this cell. This is optional and is purely up to the user. Lastly, we select the Error Alert tab and specify which error message to display when a user makes an invalid entry. This is also optional, but even if a user does not specify an error message, the computer will itself display an error message asking the user to retry his entry. After this, we come to the types of validation criteria that you can apply. There are 8 different types of criteria, which are any value, whole number, decimal, list, date, time, text length, and custom. Now coming to some practical examples in Excel, we begin with the first criteria, which is any value. Selecting this option in a certain set of cells removes any previously applied data validation. Note, however, that the input message, if any, still displays when a cell is clicked where this option has been applied. Now, in the selected cells, any value data validation has been applied. And on checking, we can see that every type of entry is being allowed. So technically speaking, this form of data validation does not restrict any form of data entry. Just to check a couple of examples more, we find that no entry is being restricted. This option is generally used in those cases where a guideline has to be provided to users before making an entry to ensure correctness of data. I shall not go into detail in how to apply this criteria as we will be covering the whole process in the next option. Next, let's now come to the whole number data validation criteria. Here, you can specify a valid range of numbers, and after providing data validation, these are the restricted set of numbers that you will be able to enter in those cells where data validation has been provided. Now, for example, here you can see there is a list of students and the ratings for the exam are between 0 to 100. So data validation has been applied in all these cells where you can enter a value between 1 to 100. And when you click on any of these cells, you get a message saying the same, which says enter a number between 1 to 100. Now, just to check the authenticity of the data validation that has been applied, let me enter a number out of the range of these cells, which is, for example, 110. Now, the moment I enter this data, you get a message saying that it is an incorrect entry and enter only numbers between 1 to 100. So I click on retry and let's say here I enter -50. Again, I get the message which says that it is an incorrect entry. So let me come back to the original score rating, which was 74. So here you can see that the correct validation criteria has been applied. So what I'll do is I'll just copy this name of students list and I paste it on a cell beside out here. Let me just outline these cells and then I select this set of cells. I go to data. From here under data tools, as I had talked to you in the PowerPoint slides, I select data validation. Now I'll just cut this out and I'll use the shortcut in this case, which is Alt A, V and V, and the same window opens up. Right? I click on the settings tab. I select the option of whole number. Under the data tab, I stick to between, and under the minimum and maximum, I write a minimum value of 1 and a maximum value of 100. Now I click on the input message, and here on the title I have selected enter number, and on the input message I have mentioned please enter a number between 1 to 100. Here I would also like to tell you that the input message only shows when you have ticked the checkbox which says show input message when cell is selected. Next I click on the error alert tab, and under the title I have chosen incorrect entry, and under the message I have written the number entered is not a whole number between 1 to 100. Even if you don't enter any specific title or a message, the computer will automatically give you a stop message saying that retry the entry because it is incorrect. So now I click on OK, and let us go to any one of these cells where data validation has been applied. Let me just put in a score of 45 has been accepted. Let me check the next box with, let's say, something like 82.5, where the entry has not been accepted because 82.5 is a decimal number and not a whole number. So I will have to retry on that. Let's make it 83. On the third number, let me try a negative number which by mistake happens. Let's say -58. And after providing enter, again I get the retry message because it has a negative sign which has by mistake happened. So I enter 58 and that has also been accepted. One last try I will do above 100, which for example says 112. And again I get the retry option and I make that 72, which has been accepted. Moving on to the next data validation criteria, which is decimal. Now the procedure for applying data validation is very much similar to the one we applied in whole numbers, where you define the required criteria and you lay down the range of numbers that will be allowed for data validation in this case. In the example that you can see in your screens, we have a list of 10 tests that have been conducted, and the rating of these tests is of a value which is less than 10, which can be in the form of a decimal or a negative number. So let's check the validation of this criteria. So in the box that I have clicked, you get the input message, and here I type the number 11, which is exceeding the validation criteria, and it gives me a retry message since the criteria that I have put down is not correct. Here let's say I want to put 0.001, which is accepted since it's in a decimal form and all decimal numbers will be allowed. So now let's look at a negative decimal number, which is minus 5.2345. That is also accepted, since again it is a decimal number which is less than the value of 10. Let's look at a last number which says 10.000005, which does not get accepted because it is exceeding the criteria. So let's look at how do we apply this criteria by selecting the same number of cells into a different range, and I post them over here. I clear the data validation. After that, I select the range of cells and then I select data validation. From the data validation settings tab, I select the decimal option, and below the decimal option under the data drop down list, I select a value of greater than or equal to, and here I specify the number 50. I have not changed the input message or the error message, which you can change on your own, and I will just do a quick test check on the data validation that I have applied. For example, I type 49, which does not get accepted, 49.99, which again does not get accepted, and finally I give it a try of 51.51, which gets accepted. I'll just do one last check of the value of 50.0006, which also gets accepted since it is above the value of 50. If we enter a value like, let's say, 1,45,623, that will also get accepted since that is also above the number 50. One of the most commonly used forms of data validation is to create a drop-down list in a cell. The user must choose from a list of entries that you provide in the drop-down list. We have different ways to use this form of validation, and I shall be explaining some of them in this given example. Let's assume a scenario where you have to provide a drop-down list containing the entire months of the year from which the users have to choose from. So in this example, we will need to provide this drop-down list in front of the cell where it says production month. In the first option on how we shall be going about this, we shall be selecting the entire set of months from a given range of data, and let us see how we apply data validation using this method. So first we come to the required cell where data validation is required. I activate the data validation window. We select list. After selecting list, we come to source, and under source we select the entire range of cells that have been provided in the worksheet. This range can be from another worksheet provided it is in the same workbook. And then we click OK. After this, we find that a drop-down list arrow has appeared beside the required cell, which contains all the months to select from. Now we can easily select the required month from the given list. Coming to the second method, in case you will be adding new items to your list, put the items in a single column table that is created by clicking on the Insert tab, the Table section, and then Table. By using this, Excel will update the list of options automatically when you add or remove items from the table column. Let us now see how this is done. Let's say we have to enter the first 6 months initially, followed by the last 6 months at the end of the year. So we select the first 6 months and click on the Insert tab, followed by Tables and then Table, and then click OK. Next, we click on the cell requiring validation, open the validation window and select List. After that, we go to the Source section and select those months which are in the form of a table. And then we click OK. We find that a drop-down list arrow has appeared beside the required cell, which contains the first 6 months. Now let's say we want to add the balance 6 months at the end of the year. So using the fill handle, we put in the balance 6 months till December. After this, we check our drop-down list and we find that the balance 6 months that we have added to our table have automatically been updated to our drop-down list. Now coming to the last method, There are times when you have a very small set of data to be entered in the source section of the list. For example, just the first 3 months like January, February and March to be written as Jan, Feb or March. In such a case, you can directly type these months in the source section without having to copy a range of cells into the source section. These have to be separated by a comma. So we first click on the required cell, we open the validation window, we select list, and finally in the source section we type Jan, Feb and March. All of these separated by a comma, and we click on OK. And here you find that we have a drop down list which provides these three entries as Jan, Feb and March. After this comes the date validation criteria. We need to specify a valid date range from choices in the data drop down list. So when the user enters a date, and depending on whether it falls within the allowed range, it will either be accepted or rejected. In this example, we have the list of new joiners in a company in the financial year 22-23, and we have to enter their joining dates. To validate the data, we first select the required cells and then open the validation window. Next, we select the date criteria from the allow drop-down list. Under data, we select between. In the start date, we enter 1st April 22, and in the end date, we enter 31st March 23 and click OK. Now that the data validation has been done, let's do a few checks. We start with 1st April 22 and that is accepted. Next, we try 1st April 23, but this is rejected since it is out of our range. We then try 1st Jan 22. This also gets rejected as this is also out of the range of the financial year. In lieu of this, we try 1st Jan 23, and this gets accepted as it falls within the financial year. Lastly, we try 31st March 22, which again faces a rejection due to the out of range problem, and finally we change it with 31st March 23, which gets accepted. The time validation criteria is quite similar to the date criteria. To use this option, we must specify a valid time range from choices in the data drop-down list. The user then enters a time which will either be accepted or rejected. In this example, you have to plan your office schedule for the coming Monday and you are already occupied in the first half. So you need to choose from a time slot post 2 p.m. for the planned activities. So we select the required cells and open the validation window. Next, we select the time criteria from the allow drop-down list. Under data, we select greater than or equal to. Under start time, we enter 2 p.m. or 1400 hours, and then we click OK. After applying data validation, if we check for time slots before 2 p.m., let's say 11 a.m., 12:30 p.m. and 1:55 p.m., they are rejected every time till a time equal to or post 2 p.m. is selected, and our plan for Monday is sorted. The next criteria is text length. Under this, the length of the data or the number of characters is limited. You specify a valid length by using the data drop-down list. For example, you can specify that the length of the entered data be 5 or 5 alphanumeric characters. For this example, we select the required cells where we have to enter the employee ID of some employees and open the validation window. Next, we select the text length criteria from the allow drop-down list. Under data, we select equal to, and under length, we enter 5 and click OK. Here in the message and error alert, you could mention please enter 5 characters only. After applying data validation, we check by entering a couple of employee IDs, and in case any of them is over or less than 5 characters, you will get an error alert asking you to retry, thus helping to avoid any errors. A second check with less than 5 entries also results in an error, helping us to correct the same. We now come to the last validation criteria, that is custom. To use this option, you must supply a logical formula that determines the validity of the user's entry. A logical formula returns either true or false. You can enter the formula directly into the formula control, which appears when you select the custom option, or you can specify a cell reference which contains a formula. We shall look at two very basic examples for this validation. In the first example, we use a formula to make sure that all the entries in the selected cells are only textual. After selecting the required cells, we open the validation window and select the custom option from the list. Under formula, we type equal to followed by ISTEXT or isText, which is the Excel formula for textual entries, and then within brackets we select the entire range of cells where validation is required. After that, we click OK. Now on checking on any of these cells, we will find that no numerical entries are allowed. Only entries that can be termed as textual entries shall be allowed in these cells. To check another example, we just do a simple multiplication, which again is not allowed, which has to be put in the form of a textual entry, which is allowed. So you can see, with the help of a simple formula, you can restrict the entries in the selected cells to only textual entries, and similarly you can do so to only numerical entries with the help of another formula which says is number, is number. Moving on to the second example, we use a formula to make sure that all the entries in the selected cells begin with A. So again, we select all the required cells, open the validation window, select custom, and under formula we type equal to followed by left and the selected set of cells within brackets, followed by the equal to sign again, and finally the alphabet A in inverted commas, and then we click OK. Again, on checking these cells, we find that none of these cells accept an entry which does not begin with A. To check with another example, so we can see that using the custom option and with the help of formulas, we have a wide range of data validations that we can accomplish depending upon our requirements. However, I shall not be going into detail in this because this video covers only the basics of data validation. I shall soon be coming out with my second video on data validation, where I shall be explaining data validation in much more detail and with a much broader scope in the examples that I will be explaining in that video. Finally, I would conclude by saying that the data validation process is an important step in data and analytics workflows to filter quality data and improve the efficiency of the overall process. It not only produces data that is reliable, consistent, and accurate, but also makes data handling easier. Companies are exploring various options such as automation to achieve validation tests that are easy to execute and in line with current requirements. Thank you all for watching my video, and I would request you to put in your feedbacks, comments and queries. And once again, I would request you to please put in your likes and subscribe to my channel.